Do you recall Leonardo DiCaprio in that one particular movie? Big parties, fast cars, and pretty girls in flapper dresses? I'm talking about The Great Gatsby, originally written by my high school crush, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was dead when I was 16. I just couldn't get over what beauty of literature came out of the band of the shittiest kind of characters. This novel is still, to this day, one of my favorite books. And you know what I found out? Before there was the titular hero, there was Joseph Christian Leyendecker, the real original Gatsby. Of course, Leyendecker did not look like Leonardo DiCaprio, because Gatsby, the character's appearance, is actually based on his boyfriend. Joseph was born in 1872 in Montabaur, southwestern Germany. His nickname was Joe. It was just Joe. He was the third of 4 children. The eldest was Adolf, born in 1869, followed by Augusta Mary in 1872, and then Joe, and lastly, the youngest, Franz Xavier, or Franz Xavier. It's a pretty hard name to say, or Frank, just Frank, born in 1876. At that time, Montabaur was nothing to write home about, so in 1882, the entire Leyendecker family crossed the Atlantic and moved to Chicago. Mommy had an uncle there, and he's actually pretty well off. He's a politician, and he also ran the McAvoy Brewing Company. Before the Prohibition hit and closed everybody, the McAvoy Company was one of the most popular and profitable out there. So Joe and his family got very lucky. For anybody who's not quite familiar with this period of American history, it's basically a brief 13 years or so where liquor was banned in the US. As immigrants, the Leyendecker family profile was, let's say, old America's favorite kind. They were German, religious, the whole family was Catholic, and already had connections. Joe's family name,
Leyendecker,
is actually just a humble occupational surname common in Montabaur. It means slate roofer. In Joseph's later years, he either claimed that his ancestry was Dutch or talked very little on this matter. In reality, the Leyendecker ancestry can be traced all the way back to the Sephardic Jews in Spain. After the Inquisition forced him to flee to the Netherlands, the lineage eventually converted to Catholicism and ended up in present-day Germany. Joseph and other members of the family were all named with Christian emphasis, probably to conceal their Jewish ancestry. Joseph Christian, Augusta Mary, they're pretty self-explanatory. And Frank, the reason why his name in German is so hard to pronounce is because he's named after the Spanish Catholic saint
Francisco Xavier,
who was one of the first Europeans to go to Japan and India. The 3 Leyendecker brothers were all very artsy. The eldest, Adolf, became a stained glass artist. Joseph and Frank both became illustrators. And Mary, well, it was a different time back then, so Mom and Dad did not expect a career out of a girl. Still, she loved her younger brothers very much, so much so that when she grew up, she signed up to basically babysit them for the rest of their lives and died unmarried. So she didn't have any kids, and Joseph and Frank were both gay. So the only Leyendecker who had children was Adolf. But he's not that important right now. I will tell you more about the Leyendecker descendants at the end of the video. Personality-wise, Adolf was always the lone wolf. Joseph and Frank were always best buddies, but Joseph was always the leader. And Frank, my poor Frank, will later forever be known as his scrawny sidekick, Mr. Inferiority Complex. And Joe was a sassy kid back then. He knew how to assert his dominance. I remember in one of his Saturday Evening Post interviews, he said that he was very proud to shamelessly show everyone his doodles no matter the quality, and his mom was very happy with this and exhibited his works all around the house. When Joe was 15 in 1889, he had already proven his artistic abilities. Mommy's uncle, a different one from the previous one actually, hired Joseph and Frank to design the labels for his brewing company. The company was sold for a fat price, and the Leyendecker family started living very comfortably. When Joseph was just 17 years old, he shook the art world by winning his first prize, the Century magazine's August Midsummer Holiday number. Second place was Maxfield Parrish, 26, also a famous illustrator to be, and needless to say, I actually really like him. And you know what? Joe blew up! You could see his work displayed in Paris, next to
Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec
at the Moulin Rouge. Actually, posters of his winning piece started appearing everywhere across US and continental Europe. It was so popular that fanatics known as drips started selling public posters for their own collections. This inspired a French publishing house to capitalize on a special edition poster marketed specifically for collectors. That was the birth of graphic art collection. Now, the cheap prints for public consumption had become a higher form of art worthy to be treasured. But Joe didn't stop to hustle. He found work first as an unpaid errand boy at J. Mans & Company, a Chicago engraving firm. I believe they closed in the 60s, so that's the end of that. He worked very hard and rose to official staff illustrator very quickly. He was producing religious pamphlets with biblical illustrations. By 1894, 20-year-old Joseph had already published 60 illustrations for his employer. While working, Joseph started taking evening classes at the Art Institute of Chicago 3 times a week to better his skills. Frank also came along because he's like his older brother's shadow at this point. Wherever he goes, Frank follows. One of Joe's instructors really liked him and recommended him to his alma mater, Académie Julian, one of the most prestigious private art schools in fancy Paris. So Joe, he started saving so that one day he and Frank may go to Baguettelandia and become the best there ever was. If at this point you're starting to feel bad about your own accomplishments, don't let that get too much into your head because we haven't even started yet. So, it is 1896. Joseph and Frank finally had enough savings to go to Paris, the center of the Western world at this time anyways. You want art? It's Paris. You want philosophy? It's Paris. You want legalized homosexuality? It's Paris, baby! The French Revolution tells you sodomy is A-OK! Clarification, homosexuality was still seen as immoral. Sodomy laws that could get you burned were dropped in the French Penal Code of 1791 during the Revolution. It means that you could do it in private and the state doesn't care anymore, but France didn't legalize same-sex marriage until 2013. Anyways, going back to Joseph. Joseph, now 22, was the next big star to be standing shoulder to shoulder with some very big names. I'm sure you've heard of them. It's
Alphonse Mucha
and the aforementioned
Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec.
Both brothers immediately joined the Académie Julian. Mucha happened to be one of the faculty. What luck! Joseph admired Mucha very much, and vice versa. Mucha was very impressed by the new student. They formed an immediate bond. The following year, Le Salon du Champ de Mars had an annual exhibition organized by the French National Society of Fine Arts. Joe had his first exhibition there. At the same time, Mucha had his first solo exhibition. Mucha even invited his friend
Paul Gauguin
to their shows. You've probably also heard of him. He's the pedo painter with really nice colors. Gauguin, however, turned out to be a salt mine of saltiness and didn't like Mucha or Leyendecker for being too academic. Gauguin is just different. Gauguin is not like other girls. But never mind the party pooper, because Joe is getting his resume littered with fancy French awards and international artistic simping. Paris gave Joe everything he needed: reception, motivation, and most importantly, inspiration. Along the River Seine, there were stalls selling Japanese prints and works by contemporary impressionists. He also acquired the particular mien of Parisian fancy pans, which made his person the more mysterious. While Joseph had nothing but work in mind, the seeds of Frank's downfall had already been sown. He started to fade even more into his brother's shadow, and he answered all those emotions with drugs and drinking Paris offered like no other. After the exhibition closed, Joe was ready to go back to America, young and headstrong and desiring nothing but success. Frank, of course, followed his big brother, but cracking slowly in spirit. The addiction he brought home will slowly strangle him. The brothers rented a studio at 410 South Michigan Avenue, known as the Chicago Center for Creativity. Yes, they were in the same building with Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous American architect, and L. Frank Baum, the author of The Wizard of Oz. Commission jobs for Joseph and Frank were plenty, and both of them enjoyed an excellent start. Soon, Chicago just wasn't big enough for the Leyendeckers. If you want to hit the world hard, you do it in New York. So, in 1900, the two brothers took their sister Mary along to New York and never looked back. Or at least, Joe didn't, because in New York, he met a certain someone who's so handsome he never looked away. Joseph pulled some strings and rented a spacious studio to paint in and a 4-story townhouse to sleep in. Mary became their cook, cleaner, secretary, and business manager. As to be expected, commissions for Joseph and Frank came pouring down onto them like Niagara Falls. They got a regular income working for magazines such as the Cluett and the Saturday Evening Post. Frank got a head start and painted twice as many jobs as Joseph, but his record did not last long, because Frank had a particular attitude. He did not enjoy completely obeying his clients. The brothers sometimes worked together on the same painting, but Joseph always did the most. Frank was often distracted by his addictions. If you see a Leyendecker painting with a weirdly proportioned figure, perhaps maybe the foot's too long or the torso's too short, that piece might have been a team job, and those inaccuracies are just Frank expressing his frustrations by sabotaging the product. Still, despite some unhappiness, this brief period was probably the happiest of their lives. Painters around their studio often shared models, and there was no end to that line of pretty boys and girls walking in. One day in 1903, Joseph was out when Frank hired a new face for a modeling job. This one was 6'2", and oh so charming with the countenance of a Greek god. His torso was built of immaculate proportions, like an inverted triangle with sculpted shoulders and a tiny waist. He spoke with a clipped British accent. His manners were the best of the old world. Actually, he was a Greek god in everything but personality. But now that I think of it, he fits right in because he's a huge asshole. When Joseph came back, he fell face down into the quicksand of love. Joseph at this time was 29, and the recipient of his passion, Charles A. Beach, was 17. They were 12 years apart, but it was a different time back then. Frank, being the lovable little brother he is, yielded Charles to model for Joseph instead. They make a funny little couple. Joseph's Parisian sophistication made up for what he lacked in appearance. I'm not trying to be mean, but in terms of the classic aestheticism he loved so much, he looked kind of more like an overcooked German shrimp. He makes Charles appear all the more beautiful. Charles was always well dressed and actually often silent during his modeling sessions. Besides that, I can't tell you much about his personality, save the fact that everyone within a 5-mile radius of him hated him, except Joe. Joe and Charles often enjoyed dinners in the city. Longley's was one of their favorite steak joints. They made good friends there. Some were future Hollywood stars, including Don Levy and Neil Hamilton. Many ended up also modeling for Joseph, sometimes even next to Beach. But Joseph knew his priorities, and Beach was always the prettiest. Artist and model would be inseparable for the rest of their lives. Then came the fateful year of 1905. Cluett, Peabody and Company, the largest collar, cuff, and shirt factory in the world, had a job for Joseph. If you're not familiar with what detachable collars and cuffs are, they're basically stiff collars you put on to fake a pristine and iron shirt without having to wash and dry and iron a shirt for every occasion. So, the company wanted to make more monies, and Joseph proposed a brilliant idea. A man. A very handsome man. This might sound very uncreative today, since social media is filled with attractive people, but back then it was a groundbreaking move in the advertising industry. Joseph created a character that will become the symbol of early 20th century America, the arrow collar man. Really, it was just his pretty boyfriend he put under the spotlight. That's why every man drawn by Leyendecker looks almost like the same person. Charles got dressed in everything from casual sporty to dressy tailcoat. It didn't matter where he was from or what he was like, but it mattered that he looked like an Ivy League scion. You probably already have a good idea of what the arrow collar man looks like, since he is, yes, basically Gatsby. Well, this was what Gatsby was going for, at least what he appeared to be in the book. Listening to Gatsby, as Nick puts it, was like skimming hastily through a dozen of magazines. His tan skin was drawn attractively tight on his face, and his short hair looked like as though it was trimmed every day. Daisy will later reprise the same opinion. He resembles the advertisement of the man, she says. You know, the advertisement of the man? If Fitzgerald wrote it, his readers got it. The Arrow Color Man was the only established male figure in ads in those times. He was the successor to national idolatry after Charles Dana Gibson's American waifu, the Gibson Girl. Technically, their periods do somewhat overlap, but Gibson Girl is more 1890 to 1900, whereas the Arrow Color Man is more 1900 to 1920s. You could see the Arrow Color Man everywhere, on billboards, major magazines, posters, car cards across North America and Europe. As it will happen when you're so focused on male beauty, if you just flip through a few Arrow Color Man ads, the homoerotic undertone isn't very unassuming. But jokes on the homophobes, because it turns out everybody was into it, and the numbers speak for themselves. You either wanted to be the Arrow Color Man or wanted to be with the Arrow Color Man. To this day, the Arrow Color Man remains one of the most successful advertising campaigns ever made. Before him, Cluett Peabody Company. Oh, I have such a hard time reading it. Cluett Peabody and Company was already a successful business, though it had plenty of competitors. After ACM, it kicked almost everybody else out of business. By 1918, Arrow's annual sales soared up to $208 million, which was 96% of market share. By 1920s, the Arrow Color Man himself received more than 1,000 love letters a week, mostly from female fans. 1 month in the early 1920s, he received over 17,000 fan letters, gifts, and marriage proposals, even more than Rudolph Valentino. Rudolph Valentino lost to a man that isn't even 3D. The success of the campaign owes directly to its message. The products the company are selling are the collars, the cuffs, basically just glorified fabric. Hand me money and I'll give you this funny thing you can wear. The product Leyendecker was selling was an identity. The emphasis isn't on the trade, but on the wonderful future a simple accessory will bring. The ACM is often posed next to pretty girls in fast cars. The state of these two then make a good contrast to the same elements from the Gibson generation, where the former were horses and the latter were called independent. Leyendecker's ads are telling you, it's buy one, get two free. The chat next to the other two accessories will be you, and you're just one arrow color away from it. After the Great War, collars and cuffs had already been dispatched to Trent Cemetery. Arrow shirts started taking over, and the Arrow Color Man became the Arrow Shirt Man. Remember Gatsby throwing all the shirts down when Daisy was visiting? And then she buries her face in them and cries, "It makes me so sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before," all on top of Gatsby's bed. Yes, it's suggestive here. That shirt is an extension of the rich and manly Gatsby. The ads worked. For a brief time, for a brief moment, he had the girl. How mere fabric could become the international measurement of wealth and masculinity, that was all thanks to Leyendecker, and needless to say, he made bank. In 9 years, Joseph had pocketed enough money to have a 14-room estate built in New Rochelle, state of New York. It was named Mount Tom after the Leyendeckers' German birthplace. The estate gave all the fancy furniture the brothers got from Europe and appropriately generous housing. Whatever Charles wanted were also squeezed in. When Joseph's father passed away 2 years later, Charles officially moved in, along with a new maid and 2 Filipino houseboys. Now, we've almost got everything here to make Gatsby. The big house, the money, and oh yes, we are missing the parties. Before the merrymaking could begin, however, the villa turned into nothing but an extravagant battlefield. Charles was the ulcer. According to Norman Rockwell, who knew the family well, Charles was corrupting Joe's relationship with his siblings so slowly he doesn't even realize it was happening. That's an actual quote. Charles took on increasingly more authority over Joe's life. Initially, he was just helping Joe out, getting the canvases stretched or the art supplies ready. He had since upgraded to hiring other models, renting costumes, and even paying other servants. Joseph became completely dependent on his lover. Charles's swollen ego turned the family into his bitter enemy. Mary had more attitude at Joe for alienating the family, while Frank absolutely despised Charles, who constantly picked fights with him. The brothers could no longer sustain working in the same space. Frank furnished his own studio in the villa, while Joe and Charles commuted together to the studio in the city. Between brother and lover, Joseph did not know how to choose. In the early 20s, Joe moved his studio again with the help of a celebrity acquaintance. Her name was Texas Guinan, actress born to Irish immigrants, known as the queen of illegal liquor and nightclubs. She had Joe and Charles in the same building as her infamous speakeasy. And yes, speakeasies are where you get your illegal sips during the Prohibition. This is somewhat of a sketchy lady. In her building, though, the actual storage of the alcohol was in the basement. The orders were carried to the lounge on the top floor through a hidden dumbwaiter, which is basically a small elevator for food. Joseph's studio had an opening in the wall for it, so naturally, he and his boyfriend enjoyed more than a few illegal drinks at work. Texas was a smart businesswoman. She didn't just offer Joe this special place by chance. The presence of the creator of the Arrow Color Man attracted all kinds of people who knew his name. His approval was the badge of fashionable worthiness of the century. Among those who came to see Joseph was a particular couple, F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda Fitzgerald, who had only recently returned from a trip to Europe. Meanwhile, Charles and Joe just couldn't get enough of the classic Roaring Twenties parties Texas hosted, so they decided to move the festivity right back into their big house despite the reluctance of Frank and Mary. Of course, the Fitzgeralds became one of the many invitees. The parties were sometimes themed, sometimes not, but always big. Neighbors knew Joseph and Charles as the weirdos down the road, and starlets knew Mount Tom was the only place to go. Whoever came, they were not only rich, but also sophisticated, well-bred, and every fancy box you can check. Businessmen, wealthy East Eggers, theater people, even a prince. That was Fitzgerald's interpretation of Joe's parties immortalized. This partying alone made New Rochelle the third richest city per capita in the country, as a new wave of artists moved in to make a colony. At night, Mount Tom was frequented by celebrities, and a new generation of illustrators fighting to inherit Leyendecker's position. Journalists also flocked over to report on the newest trends, which cars to buy, what brands to wear, scrambling to find the secrets to the Arrow Color Man. The one condition was to watch your words. Should you leak too much gossip, say about Charles and Joseph's relationship, you won't be invited again. Well, to be honest, I really don't know why Joseph throws all these parties, because unlike Gatsby, who was throwing these parties to meet Daisy, Joseph already had his love by his side. But with the regularity of festivities at this house, I'm sure he wished some singular moments would last forever. With Charles always towering over him, there was little Joe cared to bother with. Much like Gatsby, Joseph tends to stay aloof and hidden from the center of attention. He hardly knew most of the people who came, with a few exceptions, of course, such as Norman Rockwell and C. Coles Phillips, both celebrated illustrators in American art history. For Rockwell, who considered Joseph his best mentor, Joseph was spiraling down the abyss of decadence, and ever since his encounter with Charles, far beyond the point of no return. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all parties will eventually have to end. In 1923, Mary spat in Charles's face, and then she and Frank both promptly moved out. So, Mary lived on her own, and Frank lived with Rockwell for some time. Though he had some returning customers, jobs had been very scarce. And honestly, I can't blame the employers for it, because he was just way too unpredictable to employ. His temperamental and inconsistent professional performance had long before cemented his reputation as the lesser Leyendecker. I've never really talked about what he looks like, but basically, even in appearance, you could say that he was perhaps less striking than his older brother, because they basically share the same face and stature, only Frank's was softer and slightly rounder. Frank did only 6 covers between 1912 to 1919. He was making barely anything to live off of. So, to support his younger brother, Joseph hired Frank to finish Joseph's paintings. Though this is all well-meaning, this hurt Frank greatly, and he never recovered. His last cover was published in October of 1923, quite ironically for the Life magazine. In the last year of his life, he had nothing. He lost his job, his money, and his family. Drugs and alcohol made the exception, and always remained close to his person. In 1924, he passed away in obscurity from cerebral hemorrhage. 1 Leyendecker gone, 2 Leyendeckers left. Well, actually 3. I promised to talk a little bit more about the eldest Adolf. He's still alive. He moved to Missouri in 1894 and cut off all ties with the entire family. That was before Frank and Joseph went to Paris, and nobody really knows why. Maybe it's because he didn't like his little brothers turning out to be gay. In fact, if it weren't for Adolf's name getting mentioned in Frank's obituary, Adolf would have been completely forgotten. He founded the Kansas City Stained Glass Works Company in 1914 and worked until 1925. He married a French girl and had a girl and a boy, both of whom committed suicide. The girl, Genevieve Charlotte Leyendecker, poisoned herself in 1929. The boy, Joseph Adolf Leyendecker, named after his little brother, shot himself in 1977. Adolf himself was the second Leyendecker to go. He passed away in 1938. The Great Depression hit America in the 30s and stripped away all the colors and semblance of the previous decade's extravagance. Joseph and Charles would be cutting their spending. They dismissed all the housekeepers and started taking care of the large, empty estate on their own. With the Depression, jobs and income started mercilessly dwindling. The publishing industry had picked up pace to modernize with film and new media, leaving Leyendecker's decadent 20s far behind. Joseph started talking less and less, and later almost stopped talking to others altogether. Charles, of course, was the only exception, and arguably the cause. The parasite, as Rockwell called him, Charles became more and more protective of Joe, keeping many close friends, including Rockwell, from visiting his partner. In the 40s, some minor jobs for the war cause came in, but besides that, the good times were gone like a dream, so swiftly. Mount Tom became quiet. All the echoing joy and laughter were gone, and they won't be coming back. On the 25th of July, 1951, Joe was relaxing on a chaise, alone in his overgrown garden. He wore an arrow shirt, the type he used to make ads for, just without the collar. He was sipping a Chapman, a drink of black rum and orange juice, not too out of place to be in a Fitzgerald book. Suddenly in his head he felt a throbbing pain, blunt, knocking at him stubbornly until he cried out to Charles. Charles ran to Joseph and held him in his arms. But whatever Charles said to him, Joseph could no longer understand. His glass fell. Broken pieces shimmered in the dark alcohol, drenching the white shirt. When the doctor arrived, Joe was already dead. Only 7 people attended his funeral. Charles, Rockwell, Mary, 2 cousins on his mother's side, a priest, and a funeral director. Charles then followed Joe's orders to destroy everything he painted, but he could not. What was left he sold in a garage sale. Some curious neighbors stopped by to check out the eccentric couple's secrets, but the painting sold horribly. If we're talking about selling a Leyendecker today, we're talking about millions, or at least hundreds of thousands, but at this time, at the garage sale, the best one sold for less than $7. Afterwards, Charles inherited the 19-room estate from Joseph, but he too died in a year right after his lover. And the last Leyendecker, our kind Mary, who sacrificed all her relationships for her brothers, took the final responsibility to help conserve their works. She donated a good number of Joseph's works to museums, and the very few collectors that wanted him a number I believe was around 1, and she was dirt poor and passed away in 1957. There, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the Leyendecker story. Granted, I know I'm talking about a real person's life, but it's all really so much like Gatsby, isn't it? It's got a theatrical quality to it. But what do I know? I just think they were both great people, that's all. That will be it from me. The bulk of the information from this video is provided by Laurence S. Cutler and Judy Hoffman Cutler's book, J.C. Leyendecker. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. And, well, that's it. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.